The night the Alpha King was supposed to claim me, he let an entire royal court watch me break instead. I stood beneath the silver lights of Moonfall Hall, every eye on me, every whisper sharp enough to cut. I had waited a year for this ceremony. A year for Elias Thorn to stop looking at me like a problem and start looking at me like fate. Then the council moved first. One elder lifted his glass and smiled at Celeste Hale, the noble she-wolf they all wanted at his side. The kingdom needs a queen of strength and pedigree. The room answered with applause. I went cold. Elias sat on the raised throne in black and silver, broad shoulders rigid, jaw tight, blue eyes unreadable. Beautiful. Distant. Dangerous in the worst way. I told myself he would stop this. I told myself he would stand. Instead, his voice rolled through the hall, low and absolute. I will not claim a mate tonight. Just like that. No name. No explanation. No mercy. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might fall with it. Celeste stepped forward with her polished smile, all grace and poison. How wise of our king to put duty before impulse. Laughter flickered around the room. Not loud. Worse. Controlled. Royal. I felt every bit of it. I forced myself to breathe. Forced my spine straight. I would not beg. I would not cry in front of people who already wanted me erased. Still, I looked at him one last time. Stupidly. Hopelessly. Was I ever more than a rumor to you? I did not mean to say it out loud. But silence swallowed the hall, and Elias finally met my eyes. For 1 second, something moved in his face. Regret. Maybe. Conflict. Definitely. But not enough. Never enough. This is not the time, Nora. That was all he gave me. Not the time. As if my humiliation could be scheduled for later. As if my heart were a matter for the royal calendar. I turned before he could see how badly that landed. The hall blurred. The music kept playing. The court kept breathing. The world did not end. It just shifted under my feet. I made it down the marble steps and out into the cold night air before the first wave hit me. Dizzy. Sharp. Wrong. I grabbed the stone railing and pressed a hand to my stomach, trying to steady myself. But the thought that rose in me was worse than the shame still burning my skin. Something had changed. And if I was right about what my body was trying to tell me, Elias Thorn had not just humiliated me in public. He had left me carrying a secret that could destroy us both. I barely made it past the palace gates before the cold stopped helping. My vision kept dipping in and out. The gravel road blurred under the moonlight. I told myself to keep walking. Keep breathing. Keep moving until the capital was behind me and Elias Thorn was just another mistake I had survived. Then the world tilted hard. The next thing I heard was a woman's voice cutting through the dark. Easy. Do not fight me. You are safe. Safe. I almost laughed at that. When I opened my eyes, I was in a small clinic outside the city, flat on a narrow bed with a wool blanket over me and the smell of antiseptic in the air. The doctor, a gray-haired woman with steady hands and sharp eyes, checked my pulse again. You pushed too far tonight. I stared at the ceiling. I am fine. No, she said. You are not. Then she set a chart at the foot of the bed and looked right at me. You are pregnant. Everything inside me went still. Not softer. Not calmer. Still. Like the whole room had frozen around one sentence. I sat up too fast. No, my voice came out thin. That is not possible. But even as I said it, my body betrayed me. The dizziness. The nausea. The strange pull low in my stomach. The doctor did not flinch. You are early, but not so early I would mistake it. She hesitated, then added the part that turned fear into something worse. And the child carries royal scent. I looked at her so hard my eyes burned. You are wrong. I am not. Her voice dropped. If the palace learns this, you will not be treated like a woman in trouble. You will be treated like a vessel carrying a succession claim. That hit harder than the ceremony. Harder than Elias saying he would not claim a mate tonight. Because this was not just shame anymore. This was a trap with a heartbeat. I pressed both hands over my stomach before I even realized I was doing it. Mine. The thought came fast. Fierce. Terrifying. The doctor stepped back and gave me space, but her next words shoved the night forward. If you want this child safe, do not tell anyone. Especially not the king. I should have argued. I should have defended him. Instead, I heard myself whisper, I am leaving before sunrise. But as the words left my mouth, footsteps sounded outside the clinic door, and for 1 second, I could not tell if Elias had found me first, or someone far worse. The footsteps outside the clinic stopped right at my door, and every muscle in my body locked. I slid off the bed before the handle even turned, one hand over my stomach, the other reaching for the metal tray beside me like I could fight fate with a pair of scissors. Then the door opened, and Caleb Whitmore stepped in with rain on his jacket and worry written all over his face. My foster brother looked older than I remembered. Harder. Nora. He shut the door behind him and lowered his voice. You need to come with me. Now. Relief hit first. Then suspicion. How did you find me? Caleb's jaw tightened. Because half the city is already whispering your name. The doctor went still. I did not. I grabbed my coat. Then I am leaving. Caleb gave one sharp nod. Good. Because if the palace finds out what happened tonight, you will not get to choose where you go next. We left through the back before sunrise, the clinic disappearing behind us like a bad secret buried too shallow. Caleb drove us west toward Ash Pine, the human border town where I had spent my last quiet years before Elias turned my life into a slow-burning disaster. The highway stretched black and empty for miles, but my nerves never settled. Every passing set of headlights felt wrong. Every shadow on the tree line felt closer than it should. Caleb kept checking the rearview mirror. Finally I said it. Tell me the truth. His hands tightened on the wheel. The capital is saying you tried to trap the king. I laughed once. Bitter. Small. Of course they are. It is worse than gossip, he said. Someone put hunters on alert. My stomach dropped. Hunters? Caleb looked at me then. Just for a second, and that was enough. He knew there was more. Maybe not everything. But enough. We stopped near an old gas station outside town so he could make a call from a pay phone. I stayed by the truck, pulling my coat tighter against the cold. That was when I heard them. Low voices. Male. Too close. She is here, one of them said from the dark behind the pumps. The bounty was real. My blood went cold. Another voice answered, rough and eager. If she is carrying what they think she is, we do not let her reach the border. I stepped back fast, heart slamming. Rogues. Not palace guards. Not rumor. Worse. Real. One of them moved into the edge of the light, eyes fixed on me like I was already caught. And all I could think was this, if strangers were hunting me already, then my secret was not a secret anymore. The second Caleb saw the men step out from behind the gas pumps, his whole body changed. Not scared. Focused. He grabbed my arm and pulled me hard behind the truck. Get down. My heart slammed against my ribs. I did not argue. I crouched fast, one hand locked over my stomach while the other braced against the cold steel frame. The rogues spread out like they already knew where I would run. One of them smiled when he caught my scent. There she is. Caleb shot me a look sharp enough to cut through panic. When I say move, you run for the tree line. Do not stop for me. I am not leaving you. Nora. His voice dropped. Hard. Tonight is not about me. That landed where it hurt because I knew exactly what he meant. I nodded once. Then he hurled a tire iron across the lot. The crash snapped every head the wrong way. Now. I ran. Branches clawed at my coat as I pushed into the dark, lungs burning, boots slipping over wet dirt and loose rock. Behind me, I heard feet pounding, voices closing in, Caleb shouting something I could not make out. I kept moving until my body refused to keep pace. Then pain stung across my palm when I hit a jagged trunk. I bit back a cry and tasted fear instead. Blood. Not much. Enough. Enough for wolves. Caleb found me nearin'. Old service road, breath ragged, jacket torn. We have to keep going. He took one look at my hand and swore under his breath. They will track that. He wrapped it fast with a strip from his flannel and shoved me toward his truck hidden behind a line of scrub pines. Ash pine is blown. We change route now. I climbed in, shaking so hard I could barely pull the door shut. As Caleb turned the engine over, I looked down and felt my stomach drop. My scarf was gone. The pale blue one Elias had once draped over my shoulders on a freezing night outside the West Tower, before he decided duty mattered more than me. I had lost it somewhere in the woods. Caleb followed my stare. What? I swallowed hard. Nothing. But it was not nothing. There was blood on that scarf. My scent. My trail. Caleb drove us into the dark, and I pressed both hands against my stomach, trying not to break. Because somewhere behind us, the rogues were not the only ones who could find what I had left behind. And for the first time since I ran, I had the sick feeling Elias Thorn was about to realize something was very, very wrong. By the time the first headlights cut across the road behind us, I already knew we were out of time. Caleb's hands locked on the wheel. They found us again. My pulse turned violent. The truck fishtailed over loose gravel as he took a narrow logging road I had never seen before, deep into a stand of black pines and broken stone. No houses. No gas stations. No people. Just dark, wet earth and the sick feeling of being driven into a place no one would hear me scream from. Keep going, I said, even though fear was clawing up my throat. Caleb glanced at me once. I am trying. Then a shape moved across the road ahead. He slammed the brakes. The truck jerked hard. I caught myself against the dashboard, one hand flying straight to my stomach. Men stepped out of the trees. Not guards. Rogues. They did not rush us. That was the worst part. They spread out slow, certain, like they already owned the next 5 minutes. One of them tapped a hand against the hood and smiled through the windshield. Open up. We only need the girl. Caleb reached for the glove box. Empty. Of course. His voice dropped. When I open my door, you climb across and run. No, Nora. He turned, eyes sharp, scared in a way that made mine sting. You are not the target anymore. Whatever secret you are carrying, they know. The door handle on my side rattled before I could answer. I shoved myself back, breath tearing out of me. Then everything shifted. A howl split the trees. Not wild. Commanding. Royal. The rogues froze. So did I. A second later, black-clad royal guards poured through the pines, fast and silent, driving the rogues back from the truck. And right behind them, as if the dark itself had shaped into a man, Elias Thorn stepped into the headlights. Rain slicked his coat. His jaw was hard. His blue eyes landed on me first, then dropped for half a second to my hand over my stomach. Too quick. Too sharp. He had noticed. Of course he had. Caleb climbed out slowly, palms visible. Your Majesty. Elias did not look at him. He looked at me like I was both the problem and the answer. Get out of the truck, Nora. I did. Mostly because my legs moved before my pride could stop them. The cold hit hard. So did the anger. Do not pretend you came because you care. My voice shook anyway. Elias took one step closer, gaze cutting through me. I came because someone hunted what belongs under my protection. Protection. Again that word. That cage dressed as mercy. I laughed once, bitter and small. You mean your scandal? His face did not soften. I mean you are returning to the capital tonight. And with royal guards closing in around us, I realized rescue and captivity could look exactly the same. The palace welcomed me back the way a jeweled cage welcomes a bird. Quietly. Expensively. Without asking what the bird wants. By dawn, I was no longer on the road with Caleb. I was in the east guest wing of Thorn Keep, surrounded by polished stone, tall windows that did not open more than 6 inches, and 2 royal guards outside my door pretending not to listen. Not the Queen's wing. Not even close. A secured hallway for inconvenient things the crown could not afford to lose. I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the cream-colored walls and the silver tea service laid out for me like that made any of this kind. You cannot keep me here. Elias had followed me in only far enough to make a point. He did not sit. He did not soften. He looked exactly like a king who had decided the argument was already over. I can, he said. Until the thread is contained, you do not leave palace grounds. I laughed, sharp and ugly. So now I matter? His eyes held mine for one hard second. Your safety does. That should have helped. It did not. Because he still said it like a command. Like I was a border problem, not a woman. By noon, the whole palace knew where I had been placed. Celeste Hale arrived in a pale gray dress and a smile polished to perfection. She carried flowers. Of course she did. Nora, she said sweetly, glancing around the room like she was appraising temporary housing. I am so relieved you are safe. The king has been under such strain. I said nothing. She stepped closer anyway. This wing is ideal, truly. Private. Secure. Discreet. Then she lowered her voice just enough to sting. For unfortunate complications. I felt the insult land clean and hot. You should go. Celeste's smile never moved. I only came to welcome you back to your proper place. She left the flowers on the table like an offering to my humiliation and walked out. By evening, I did not need anyone to explain my status. I heard it through the half-open service door when 2 maids paused outside my room. Poor thing, one whispered. Poor thing, the other said. Please. Everyone knows Celeste Hale will still be queen. The king is only keeping that girl here because he has to. I went still. Because there it was. The truth of this palace. I was not home. I was not chosen. I was simply the scandal they had not found a cleaner way to bury yet. The morning after I heard the maids call me a complication, I could not breathe inside those polished walls another second. So I slipped past the east wing at sunrise and followed the stone path to the palace greenhouse, the only place in Thorn Keep that did not smell like judgment. Warm air hit me the second I stepped inside. Wet earth. Citrus. Leaves. White orchids climbing iron frames. For a moment, I let myself pretend I was nowhere near a throne, a court, or the man who had turned my life into a sealed room with guards outside. Then the floor shifted under me. Hard. My vision blurred at the edges. I caught the side of a wooden table, but my knees still gave. Careful. His voice landed before his hands did. Elias caught me around the waist and pulled me upright like my body weighed nothing and my pride weighed too much. I froze against him. Heat. Strength. The same dangerous steadiness that had once made me feel safe before it made me feel foolish. Let go, I said, but it came out weak. His grip tightened for one beat, just enough to stop me from falling again. Not until you can stand. I hated that my pulse reacted before my anger did. He guided me to a bench beneath the glass ceiling, crouched in front of me, and for the first time in days his face was not carved from ice. It was worse. It was human. You are pale, he said quietly. Has anyone been taking proper care of you? I stared at him. Of all the things I expected from Elias Thorn, concern was the most confusing. Why do you care now? He held my gaze. Answer me, Nora. Something in me cracked at the sound of my name in that tone. Not king. Not command. Just him. My hand moved before I could stop it, pressing low against my stomach. His eyes followed the motion. Sharp. Instant. Dangerous. This was it. One truth. One sentence. I could tell him. I could end the hiding and force him to face what he had done to both of us. My mouth parted. Elias, then I heard heels on glass tile behind us. Light. Measured. Familiar. Celeste. I looked past his shoulder and saw her reflection moving toward us through the roses. Every instinct in me slammed shut. I pulled my hand away and stood too fast. You lost the right to ask if I am well, I said. His expression changed at once. The softness vanished. The distance came back. But not before I saw it. Confusion. Suspicion. And the terrible question rising behind his eyes as Celeste stepped closer and I swallowed the truth one more time. By noon, the palace stopped pretending I was a guest. A royal messenger arrived at my door with 4 guards, 1 physician, and an order sealed in black wax. His Majesty requires a routine health inspection, the man said, like we were discussing weather and not my body. I did not move. No, the physician stepped forward anyway, eyes carefully blank. This is for palace security. I laughed once. Cold. My body is not a hallway you get to search. The guards shifted. The message was clear. This was not a request. By the time they escorted me into the lower council chamber, half the court was already there. Elias stood near the center in dark formal clothes, unreadable as ever. Gideon Wren stood at his shoulder. Celeste watched from the second row, calm as moonlight and twice as false. What is this? I asked, my voice cutting harder than I felt. Gideon answered first. Recent events require certainty. I looked straight at Elias. And you allow this? His jaw flexed. Stand down and let the physician do her work. That hurt more than if he had shouted. Because it was him again. Choosing order. Choosing the crown. Choosing anything but me. I took one step back. Do not touch me. But the court had already decided what I was. A problem. A rumor. A risk to be measured. The physician stopped in front of me, quiet and efficient, while the room held its breath. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. Instead I stood there and let humiliation burn straight through me because there were too many witnesses and nowhere to go. Then the physician stiffened. Her eyes flicked to Elias. Your Majesty, silence snapped tight. She swallowed once. She is pregnant. The room changed in a single breath. Not softer. Sharper. Colder. More dangerous. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Celeste went still. Gideon's eyes lit with something ugly and fast. I could not look at Elias. I would not. But the physician was not done. She stepped closer, breathed in once, and turned pale. The child carries royal blood. Now I looked at him. I had to. Elias did not move. That was the worst part. No outburst. No denial. No claim. Just that hard, terrible stillness I had already learned to fear. Around us, the whispers started low and spread like fire through dry grass. The king's heir. The scandal. The girl from the East Wing. I wrapped both arms around myself, but it was too late. My secret was no longer mine. Then Elias finally spoke, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. Everyone leaves. Now. After Elias cleared the room, he did not come to me first. He turned to the council. That told me everything. I stood in the center of the chamber with my secret ripped open and my pulse still crashing in my ears while men in formal black debated where to put me, as if I were already a problem on a map. The heir must be secured, one elder said. She should be moved to the lower keep until the birth. Lower keep. The words hit like cold iron. Not a room. Not protection. A vault with locks and no sky. Celeste spoke next, smooth and gentle enough to sound kind if you were stupid enough to believe her. Surely we all want what is safest for the crown. For the crown. Never for me. Never for the child as more than leverage. I looked at Elias then. Really looked. Are you going to let them cage me underground? He did not answer right away, and that pause cut deeper than any insult the court had thrown at me so far. Then his voice came down hard. She will not be moved to the lower keep. Relief flashed first. Fast. Treacherous. It died just as quickly when he kept going. Nora will be relocated to the royal residence under guard. Access will be restricted. No one enters without my order. My laugh came out thin and bitter. So I do get a cage. Just one with nicer curtains. His eyes met mine, cold blue and impossible to read. You are being targeted. And now I am being contained. The court heard the difference. That was the humiliation of it. Not just that they all knew. That they all watched him manage me like a threat with a heartbeat. By evening, the rumor had spread through Thorn Keep faster than fire in dry grass. I did not need to leave my rooms to know it. The servants outside stopped speaking when I passed. The guards would not meet my eyes. Even the maid who brought my dinner trembled when she set the tray down. They are saying terrible things, she whispered before she could stop herself. Like what? She swallowed. That you planned this. That you got close to the king to force a succession claim. I stared at the untouched tea on the tray until my vision blurred. Planned this. As if I had begged for public shame. As if I had wanted a child to be born into a war before it ever took its first breath. Later, when the palace had gone quiet, Elias came to the doorway of my new rooms. He stayed there like a man who knew he would not be welcomed farther in. These guards are for your protection. I turned to face him, one hand already resting over my stomach. No, I said. They are here to make sure I do not disappear with something you need. His face did not change. But the silence between us did. It got heavier. Sharper. Dangerous in a different way. Because for the first time since the court exposed my secret, I understood exactly what his protection felt like. Not safety. Not comfort. A prison with royal guards outside the door. He came to my door after midnight, when the palace had gone still enough to hear my own thoughts turning against me. Elias did not step inside at first. He stood beneath the lantern light in black and silver, broad shoulders rigid, face carved into that same cold control I had learned to hate. We need to speak, he said. I almost laughed. That would be new. He came in anyway. The guards closed the door behind him, and suddenly the room felt too small for all the things he had never said. Elias looked at me, then at the hand I kept over my stomach like my body already knew I was the only one who would protect what was inside me. The court will move against this child if I do not stay ahead of them, he said. Straight to strategy. Straight to the crown. Of course. So that is what this is about, I said. Not me. The heir. His jaw tightened. The kingdom cannot survive another succession crisis. I stared at him, waiting for the rest. Waiting for one sentence that sounded human. It never came. The silence stretched until it started to hurt. "And what about me?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. That made it worse. Elias held my gaze, and for one dangerous second I thought he might finally understand the question beneath the question. Instead he said, "You are safest if the heir is protected first." Safest. Protected. First. Every word landed wrong. Every word proved exactly what I had been trying not to believe since the court exposed my pregnancy. I was not a woman to him. Not tonight. Not here. Just the body standing between the kingdom and disaster. I felt something in me go cold and clean. Not heartbreak this time. Something sharper. Smarter. "Thank you," I said. Elias frowned. "For what?" I lifted my chin and looked right back at the king who could command a room but still could not say my name like it mattered. "For making it clear." He took one step toward me. "Nora." "No," I backed away before he could close the distance. "You do not get to stand here and talk about my child like a crown asset and expect me to confuse that with care." His face changed then. Just slightly. "Too late. I am trying to keep you alive." "Maybe," I said. "But you are not trying to keep me." That landed. I saw it. The smallest crack in that royal control. But I did not let it matter. I could not. Because if I let one look, one pause, one almost tender moment fool me again, I would lose more than pride next time. I would lose the part of myself that still believed love could survive power. Elias stood there for a long second, silent and unreadable. Then he turned and left without another word. The door shut. The guards stayed. The palace breathed on around me. And I made a promise into the quiet, one hand over my stomach, the other clenched hard at my side. I would never beg that man to choose me again. The next morning, they came for me with books. Not chains. Not guards with drawn authority. Somehow that felt worse. A royal attendant entered my rooms carrying leather-bound manuals thick enough to break a wrist, followed by Elder Maeve in silver robes and a stare that missed nothing. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Reinvention. Repackaging. The crown's favorite trick. Maeve set the top book on the table. Between us. Royal lineage. Court law. Succession rights. Preparation, she said. For the mother of a future heir. I let out a sharp breath. I am not here to be polished into a quieter version of myself. Maeve did not blink. Good. Quiet women do not survive this palace. That caught me off guard. Not enough to trust her. Just enough to listen. She led me to a smaller solar off the residence wing where noble daughters usually learned posture, diplomacy, and how to smile without saying anything dangerous. I failed the smile part on purpose. Every lesson felt like a dressed-up command. Sit straighter. Speak slower. Learn the family lines. Learn which houses would kiss the heir's hand and which would cut it off if they could. My temper rose fast. You are trying to turn me into a royal broodmare with better manners. Maeve's mouth thinned. I am trying to make sure no one erases you before your child is born. That landed harder than I wanted. I went quiet. Not because I agreed. Because I recognized the truth inside it. By late afternoon, she unrolled an old genealogy chart across the table. Names. Crests. Dead alliances. My eyes skimmed past them until Maeve's finger stopped on a faded silver wolf sigil half hidden near the bottom corner. Mooncrest. Something in me tightened. Why show me that? Maeve studied my face like it was another document to decode. Because when you entered this room, I caught a trace beneath the thorn scent. My pulse stumbled. What trace? Her voice dropped. Old blood. Older than the current throne. Mooncrest blood. I laughed once, reflex more than humor. That line died out. That is what history says, she replied. History is often written by whoever survived long enough to lie. I stared at the sigil until the edges blurred. It should have meant nothing. A dead house. A dust-covered symbol. But my mother had once worn a silver pendant with that same crescent wolf carved into it. I had not thought of it in years. Maeve rolled the chart closed before I could ask more. Learn fast, Nora. You are no longer only carrying power. She turned for the door, then added the part that followed me long after she left. You may have been born from it. The first formal dinner after Elder Maeve showed me that faded Mooncrest sigil. Felt less like a meal and more like a test I had not agreed to take. The royal dining hall glowed with candlelight, polished silver, and the kind of expensive silence that always broke in the ugliest direction. I took my assigned seat halfway down the table, far enough from the throne to remind everyone what I was not. The moment I sat, I felt the eyes. Noble she-wolves in jeweled gowns. Elder alphas with cold hands and colder opinions. Then the whispers started. She does not even know which fork to touch. Strange what the king will tolerate now. Celeste Hale sat 3 seats from Elias in pale gold, perfect posture, perfect smile, and just enough patience to make cruelty look elegant. When the first servant poured tea, she tilted her head and said, almost kindly, we should all be gracious. Palace customs can be overwhelming for those who did not grow up among them. A few people laughed into their glasses. My face burned hot. I set my hand over my lap to stop it from shaking. Then perhaps palace customs should include basic decency, I said. The laughter died, but not the humiliation. If anything, speaking only made them look at me harder. Celeste's smile sharpened. How spirited. The room leaned her way. Of course it did. She belonged here. I was still the woman from the East Wing carrying inconvenient blood and a more inconvenient future. Then a chair scraped against stone at the head of the table. Loud. Deliberate. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Move, he said. One of the council lords beside him went pale, stood at once, and stepped back. The entire hall froze. Elias turned his eyes on me. Nora. Sit here. For one breath, I could not move. It was not tenderness. Not an apology. It was worse in its own way. Public. Unavoidable. A line drawn in front of everyone who had spent the last week pretending I could be managed from the edges. I walked the length of that table with every gaze cutting into me and took the seat beside the king. No one laughed after that. No one dared. The rest of dinner passed under a strained quiet that felt like a held weapon. Later, when the hall emptied and the last servant cleared the final plate, Elias fell into step. Beside me in the corridor. I looked at him, still thrown by what he had done. Why? He did not slow. Because they were being foolish. That was all. No warmth. No explanation. Just that same wall between us, rebuilt in one sentence. And somehow that hurt almost as much as the humiliation had. Because for a few dangerous minutes, I had let myself wonder whether sitting beside him meant something. But as Elias walked away without looking back, I realized the question was not whether he would protect me in public. It was whether I would ever know what any of it meant in private. That night, the palace felt too polished to trust. After dinner, after Elias seated me beside him like a warning no one could misread, I could not sleep. The silence in Thorn Keep had started to sound staged, as if the walls themselves were listening for weakness. So when a soft knock came at my private sitting room door, every instinct in me sharpened. Caleb slipped inside before the guard rotation changed, rain dark hair damp, jaw tense. You should not be here, I whispered. He gave a humorless smile. That has not stopped me before. Then he crossed to the window and lowered his voice. Nora, listen to me. Something is wrong inside this palace. My stomach tightened. That narrows it down. Caleb did not smile this time. He pulled a folded scrap of paper from his coat pocket and set it on the table. I recognized one name immediately. Gideon Wren. The second hit harder. Dorian Voss. A rival alpha with enough ambition to start a war and enough charm to make fools call it diplomacy. Where did you get this? I asked. West Corridor. Outside the records chamber. Caleb's voice went tight. I did not hear everything. Only enough. He looked me dead in the eye. They were discussing you. And the baby. Cold moved through me so fast it almost felt clean. What exactly did they say? Caleb hesitated. That scared me more than the answer. That if the heir is born under the wrong conditions, the throne becomes negotiable. I stared at him. Negotiable? Controlled, he said. Redirected. Broken apart. Pick the word you like least. The room went still around us. Not because I did not understand. Because I understood too well. This was not court gossip anymore. Not nobles whispering that I trapped the king. This was bigger. Organized. Planned. Does Elias know? Caleb shook his head once. If he does, he is hiding it well. That landed badly. Because if Elias did not know, then the palace was rotting closer to his throne than anyone realized. And if he did know, then I did not want to finish that thought. Caleb reached for my hand, then stopped when he saw where my other one rested over my stomach. You need to be careful now, he said quietly. Not just with what you say. With who sees you breathe. He left before the guards changed. I stood alone in the lantern light with the paper still open on the table, Gideon's name burning into my vision. And for the first time since Elias dragged me back to the capital, I stopped thinking of this place as a cage. A cage was meant to keep me in. This palace was starting to look like something far worse. A trap built by someone already inside it. I found Elias in the map room after midnight, standing over the kingdom like he could hold it together by force alone. Candlelight cut across old borders, trade routes, war lines. His jacket was off. His sleeves were rolled up. For once, he looked less like a king in a portrait and more like a man who had not slept in days. I should have left. Instead I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. He did not turn right away. You should not be wandering the palace alone. And you should not keep secrets in rooms with unlocked doors. That got his attention. Elias looked at me then, blue eyes sharp, tired, unreadable. I crossed to the table and let my hand rest on one of the old maps, not because I cared about borders, but because I needed something steady under my fingers. Do you know what your advisor has been doing? I asked. His face changed by less than an inch. Still enough for me to notice. Gideon serves this crown. Maybe. But not you. Silence pressed between us. Heavy. Dangerous. Elias moved around the table slowly, as if any sudden step might turn this into a fight neither of us was ready to finish. What did Caleb tell you? I hated that he guessed the source so fast. I hated more that he did not deny the threat. Enough, I said. Enough to know this palace is not only cruel. It is compromised. Elias exhaled once, rough and low. I know there are fractures. Fractures? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Men are discussing my child like a bargaining chip. That landed. Hard. He stopped close enough for me to feel the heat of him, not touching, just there. I did not know it had gone that far. For a second, I believed him. That was the dangerous part. In the candlelight, with the map spread wide and his guard lowered by half an inch, I could almost see the man buried under the crown. Then why did you stay silent at moonfall? I asked. His jaw tightened. He looked away first, toward the window, toward anything but me. Because the last queen this court truly embraced died before her first winter on the throne. My breath caught. He kept going, voice flatter now, like he had told himself this story too many times to let it heard in public. She was claimed too soon. Named too loudly. Half the kingdom bowed. The other half sharpened knives. I stared at him. So you humiliated me to protect me? Elias turned back, and something dark moved through his expression. Not pride. Regret. I kept you unclaimed because a visible bond paints a target. That should have helped. It almost did. Almost. Because it still left me with the same ache. The same emptiness where choice should have been. You do realize, I said quietly, that being spared in public does not feel much different from being abandoned there. His face went still. This time not cold. Hit. Before he could answer, the map room doors flew open. A royal guard stepped in, breathless, armor half fastened. Your Majesty, there has been an attack on the eastern border. And just like that, the one honest conversation we had almost managed was swallowed whole by the kingdom again. The morning after the border attack, the palace moved like nothing had happened. That was the first warning. Real danger never announced itself twice. I was crossing the south corridor when I heard voices behind the half-closed council doors. Celeste first. Smooth. Careful. The kingdom needs stability, Elias. A queen the noble houses will trust. I should have kept walking. I did. Not. Then Elias answered, too low at first to catch, and my pulse started climbing for reasons I hated. I stepped closer, just enough to hear the part that mattered. What the kingdom needs and what I can publicly give it are not always the same. Celeste did not miss a beat. Then give them me. Let me stand beside you. Let me quiet the court. My whole body went cold. I waited for him to shut it down. To say no. To say her name the way he never said mine. Instead, there was a pause. One sharp, brutal pause. Then Celeste spoke again, softer now. I can help raise the child as royal. The court would accept that. I stopped breathing. That was it. The shape of the fear I had not wanted to name. Not just that they would use my baby. That they would take my place beside it and call it order. The door opened before I could hear more. I turned too late. Elias stepped into the corridor and found me there. His face hardened at once. How long have you been standing here? Long enough. My voice cut, but it was already breaking underneath. Do not explain it. I heard exactly what I needed to hear. His eyes narrowed. Nora. No, I backed away before he could close the distance. You do not get to protect me in public and negotiate me away in private. Hurt flashed first. Then frustration. That is not what happened. Maybe not. But pain does not wait for perfect facts. It builds a home in whatever silence you give it. I looked at him one last time and felt something colder than heartbreak settle into place. You want an heir, I said. Fine. But from this moment on, I will protect this child as if I am the only parent it has. Then I walked away before he could answer, because if I stayed 1 second longer, I might have asked the one question I was no longer willing to hear answered. By the time the moonlit blessing began, I was still carrying the bruise of that corridor outside the council chamber. Not on my skin. Somewhere worse. The palace chapel had been open to the night, silver lanterns hanging from cedar beams, noble families gathered in careful rows like they were here for devotion and not spectacle. Elder Maeve told me the blessing would calm the court after the border unrest. I knew better. It was another chance to look at me without calling it judgment. I stood near the altar in a pale gray gown I had not chosen, one hand resting low over my stomach, trying not to feel like an offering. Elias stood across the aisle in formal black, every inch the king, every inch impossible. He had not spoken to me since I walked away from him. Good, I told myself. Better. Safer. Then the candles flickered hard. A sound split the air. Not loud. Fast. Wrong. Instinct moved before thought. So did Elias. 1 second I was staring at the altar. The next, his body was in front of mine, one arm locking around my waist, the other jerking me backward as something hissed through the open side of the chapel and struck him high in the shoulder. The world lurched. Gasps tore through the crowd. Someone screamed. Elias did not. He went rigid for one brutal second, then turned his head and barked, "Lock down the palace. No one leaves." Blood darkened the black fabric at his shoulder. Not much at first. Enough. My own breath vanished. Elias. His name came out thin, terrified, too intimate for a room full of witnesses. His arm was still around me. Still holding me upright even as the chapel erupted into panic. Guards surged. Elders shouted. Celeste stood frozen 3 rows back, pale and useless. Elias looked down at me, eyes sharp despite the pain, and all that cold distance was gone. "Are you hurt?" I stared at him. Of all the things I expected, not that. Not first. Not with blood on him and half the court watching. "You took the hit for me." It was not really a question. His jaw tightened. "I did what was necessary." Necessary. I almost laughed. Except my hands were shaking too hard. Guards rushed forward, but Elias shook them off long enough to push me behind him again. Like even wounded, he still thought he could hold the whole world back with his body. The physician arrived. Orders snapped through the chapel. But all I could see was that dark stain spreading across his shoulder because someone had aimed at me, and he had moved without hesitation. Without strategy. Without pause. As they led him away. He looked over once more and gave the command that changed the entire room. "Nora does not leave my sight tonight." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I could not tell which terrified me more. The person who wanted me dead. Or the sudden, undeniable proof that Elias Thorn would bleed to keep me alive. The room they moved Elias to after the attack was 1 floor above mine, guarded like a treasury and quiet in the way only royal fear can make a hallway quiet. I told myself I was there because Elder Maeve insisted the king would recover faster if the mother of his child stayed close. I told myself that was the only reason. Then I stepped into his chambers and saw him half reclined against dark pillows, pale at the edges, shoulder bandaged, jaw set like pain was an insult he refused to acknowledge. Every excuse I had prepared turned thin. He looked at me once. "You came." I set the tray of broth and medicine on the side table harder than necessary. "Do not make it sentimental." His mouth almost moved. Not a smile. Something smaller. More dangerous. I busied myself with practical things because practical things do not ask why your pulse reacts to a man who keeps breaking you. I adjusted the blanket. Checked the untouched glass of water. Reached for the tincture the physician left behind. When my fingers brushed his, the baby stirred low in my stomach, sudden and sharp enough to steal my breath. Elias noticed at once. Of course he did. His eyes dropped to my hand resting there, then lifted back to mine. "What is it?" I hated how soft my voice came out. "Nothing. Do not lie to me." There it was again. Not tenderness. Control wearing concern like a better coat. I should have pulled away. Instead I stood too close while he caught my wrist lightly, not trapping me, just anchoring me. "I could not let anything happen to what is mine," he said. The words went through me like heat and damage at the same time. Mine. Not chosen. Not loved. Possessed. Protected. Claimed in every way except the one that mattered. I looked at him and hated that part of me reacted before my pride did. "That is not the comfort you think it is." His expression shuddered almost instantly. "I was not trying to comfort you." There. Cold again. Wall rebuilt. I stepped back so fast my chair caught the rug. "You never are." I left before he could answer and found Elder Maeve waiting in the outer corridor like she had expected the fracture before I lived it. Her gaze dropped to my stomach. Did the child move strongly when you were near him? I went still. How did you know? Maeve's face tightened in a way I had never seen before. Because royal blood sometimes wakes early. Especially when fear, bond, and power all converge. A chill slid down my spine. What does that mean? Her voice lowered. It means your child may begin responding to the king before birth. I stared at her, one hand already pressed low over the place that had stirred the second Elias touched me. Inside the chamber behind us, I heard the faint scrape of his movement, as if he had risen despite the wound. And suddenly the air between us did not feel safer because he had bled for me. It felt stranger. Deeper. As if something inside me had started answering him before I was ready to. The next morning, Elder Maeve summoned me to the archive tower before sunrise, when the palace still smelled like cold stone and old secrets. She did not waste time on pleasantries. A ledger already lay open on the table beside her, its pages brittle, its ink faded to the color of dried smoke. Sit, she said. I stayed standing. If this is another lesson in how to survive being watched, I am not in the mood. Maeve's eyes did not leave mine. This is a lesson in why they may never stop. That got me. I crossed the room and sat. She turned the book toward me and tapped a name buried inside a line of dead houses. A woman's name. Ilara Mooncrest. Beneath it, a silver wolf crest worn thin by time. My breath caught before I could stop it. My mother had that symbol, I said quietly. Maeve gave one slow nod. Because your mother was Mooncrest born. The room went still around me. That line was wiped out. Officially, she said. In truth, what was not destroyed was hidden. She slid another page over. Marriage contracts. Blood oaths. A record of a girl smuggled out under another family name. My family. Name. Whitmore. I stared so hard the letters blurred. No, my voice cracked on the word. No, this cannot be real. Maeve leaned closer. Nora, your child is not only the king's heir. The child carries Thorn blood and Mooncrest blood together. If this becomes public in full, the noble houses will not see you as a scandal anymore. I looked up slowly. What will they see? Her answer came clean and cold. A threat. I should have felt empowered. Instead I felt the floor shift under my whole life. Not because I was nobody rising higher. Because I was discovering I had never been nobody at all. Every insult. Every dismissal. Every room that treated me like I did not belong. And now the truth was somehow worse. Because belonging to power meant being owned by it. Before I could speak again, the archive door opened. A young attendant rushed in, pale and breathless. He bowed to Maeve, but his eyes flicked to me with the fear people reserve for news that spreads faster than permission. Elder, he said, voice shaking, the court is already talking. Someone leaked the Mooncrest trace from the scent records. I went cold. Maeve closed the ledger at once. Too late. Outside, somewhere below the tower, I could already hear the faint shift of the palace changing direction. Not away from me. Toward me. And for the first time since this started, I understood the full shape of my danger. I was no longer just carrying power. I had become part of it. By noon, the palace stopped whispering and started arranging chairs. That was how I knew the rumor had matured into something uglier. Not gossip. Procedure. A royal attendant came to my rooms in formal black and read the order without looking me in the eye. By request of the noble houses, a tribunal will convene at first bell to determine the legitimacy of your conduct, your claim, and any undue influence exerted over the crown. I stared at him. My conduct. The words tasted rotten. He bowed lower. Those are the council's terms. After he left, I stood alone in the center of the room with one hand over my stomach and the other curled so hard my nails bit into my palm. They had learned I carried power, so naturally they decided to put me on trial for it. The tribunal chamber was already full when I arrived. Elders, nobles, council lords. Even Celeste, seated with the careful stillness of a woman who wanted to look above this while benefiting from every second of it. Elias stood at the front beside the throne dais, dressed in black, face unreadable. I looked at him once. Only once. I needed to know whether he would stop this before it began. He did not. One elder rose and spoke like he was delivering weather, not tearing open a woman already cornered. Nora Whitmore stands accused of manipulating access to the king, concealing pregnancy for strategic gain, and provoking instability through hidden lineage. The room shifted toward me, hungry and clean in the way cruelty loves to dress itself as order. I lifted my chin anyway. You make survival sound like seduction. A few faces tightened. Most did not. The elder continued. If the king wished to dismiss these concerns, he could have. That one landed because it was true. Elias could have crushed this with a word. Instead he stood there and let the process unfold. Strategic, I told myself. Political. Necessary. But pain does not care what name you give it. Pain only knows when someone you needed stayed still. Celeste finally spoke, voice low and polished. Let the tribunal proceed. If Nora is innocent, she should want clarity. I turned to her then. And if I am not useful to you, I should want judgment instead? She did not answer. She did not need to. The court already had. I looked back at Elias one last time, waiting for some crack in that royal mask. Something human. Something that said he saw what this was doing to me. His gaze met mine, steady and impossible. No rescue. No interruption. No public claim. Just silence again, dressed in duty. In that moment, the chamber felt colder than the road I collapsed on the night I learned I was pregnant. Because then I had at least been alone in my fear. Now I was standing in front of an entire kingdom, and the one man who could have stopped it was letting me burn. They expected me to defend myself like a woman begging for mercy. That was their first mistake. I stood in the tribunal chamber with every noble eye fixed on me, Elias silent at the front, Celeste composed in her seat, and the elder council waiting for me to crack. I did not. I let the silence stretch until it belonged to me instead of them. Then I lifted my chin and said, "You want clarity? Fine. Let us start with this. I was hunted before my pregnancy was public. Explain why." The room shifted. Not enough. Not yet. One elder frowned. That proves nothing. No, I said. It proves someone knew enough to set rogues on my trail before this court ever pretended to care about truth. I turned, slow and deliberate, letting my gaze cut across the chamber. So if I manipulated anything, tell me why I was the one running for my life. That landed. I felt it. Not victory. Fracture. A council clerk was called forward with road reports from the border district. Elias still said nothing, and somehow that helped now. Because for the first time, his silence did not feel like abandonment. It felt like space. Dangerous, deliberate space for me to speak. The elder on the dais was still reaching for control when the chamber doors opened hard. Caleb. Breathless. Mud on his boots. A fresh cut across one cheek. He did not bow first. He crossed half the floor and held up a leather ledger page stamped with palace inventory marks. I have proof, he said. Guards moved. Elias lifted one hand. They stopped. Caleb turned toward the tribunal. A location notice was pulled from internal records the same night Nora fled the capital. Her route was not guessed. It was leaked. The chamber broke into whispers. Gideon's face did not change. That was the problem. He was too still. Too ready. I saw it. I think Elias did too. Caleb laid the page before the elders. Someone inside this palace marked her as recoverable property before the rogues moved. Property. The word made my stomach turn. Then Elias finally stepped forward. Not as the man who failed me at Moonfall. Not as the king who let me stand alone 5 minutes too long. As something colder. Sharper. Final. His voice hit the chamber like iron. Any attack on Nora Whitmore or her child is treason against the crown. No one breathed. Not for a second. He looked at the tribunal, then at the nobles, then at every person who had tried to turn me into a convenient lie. This proceeding is suspended. Effective now. Celeste went pale. The elders fell silent. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the room did not look at me like a scandal to be managed. It looked at me like something harder to erase. But as the court broke apart around us, Elias turned toward Gideon for one brief second too long, and I knew this was not over. We had won the room. We had not yet found the hand inside the palace that tried to destroy me. Winning the tribunal should have made me feel safer. It did not. It only changed the shape of the danger. That afternoon, the palace corridors were too quiet, the servants too careful, the nobles too polite. Fear had replaced mockery, and somehow that felt worse. I was leaving Elder Maeve's chamber when I heard Celeste's voice through the half-open door of the solar ahead. Soft. Measured. Intimate in the way only practiced women can make it sound. The kingdom is fracturing, Elias. They need something stable to look at. I stopped before I could think better of it. Then Elias answered, low and tired. I know what they need. Celeste moved closer. I could hear it in the floorboards, in the lowered rhythm of her voice. Then let me give it to them. Let me stand beside you. Let me become the answer they can accept. My pulse turned cold. I should have walked away. I did not. I stayed there long enough to hear the next part, the part that stripped every breath from my lungs. The child will still be royal, Celeste said. If Nora cannot be made suitable, I can raise the heir within the proper line. I went still. Not shocked. Not confused. Something cleaner. A fear so old it already knew where to land. My child. My place. My future. Rearranged with polished voices behind a royal door. I stepped back just as it opened. Elias saw me first. Of course he did. His expression changed at once. Nora. Celeste looked between us and went perfectly solemn, which somehow made me hate her more. I laughed once. Bitter. Small. Do not stop on my account. Elias took one step toward me. You heard this wrong. Maybe. Maybe not. But pain does not care about technicalities when it hears another woman offering to mother your child like you are already. Halfway erased. I backed away, one hand over my stomach before I even realized I had done it. Did I? My voice shook, but not enough to hide the truth in it. Because it sounded like the kingdom gets its queen, you get your stability, and I get turned into the temporary problem who carried the heir. Celeste opened her mouth. I cut her off without looking at her. Do not. Elias's face hardened, not in anger. In frustration. In that same terrible control that always made me feel like the emotional one in a room full of strategy. No one is taking this child from you. I wanted to believe him. That was the dangerous part. Instead I held his gaze and gave him the only promise I trusted. From now on, I plan for the day someone tries. Then I walked away before either of them could see how badly the thought had already started breaking me. I did not wait for dawn. Fear does not keep civilized hours. By the time the palace lamps burned low and the guard's shift softened at the edges, I had already made up my mind. Caleb met me in the service corridor with a dark coat, a satchel, and the kind of silence that only shows up when someone knows this is a bad idea and helps anyway. If we take the lower path through the orchard, we can reach the forest gate in 10 minutes, he whispered. I nodded, one hand braced low over my stomach as we moved through the sleeping palace like fugitives instead of residents. Every step felt wrong. Fast. Necessary. I told myself I was not running from Elias. I was running from the day the crown decided my child belonged more to history than to me. We made it as far as the forest gate. Iron bars. Moonlight. Cold air on my face for the first time in days. Freedom was right there, inches away, when a voice cut through the dark. Open that gate and you make this worse. Elias stepped out of the shadows with 2 guards behind him, black coat unfastened, jaw tight, eyes burning with a fury so controlled it scared me more than shouting would have. Caleb moved in front of me by instinct. Elias did not even look at him. Leave us. Caleb hesitated. I said, go. The second. He was gone, the silence between Elias and me turned sharp enough to draw blood. You were going to run again, he said. You were going to let Celeste raise my child, I shot back. His whole body went still. That is what you think this is? I heard enough. My voice broke anyway. Enough to know everyone in this palace talks about my baby like I am temporary. He stepped closer. No one is taking this child from you. From me? I laughed once, brittle and ugly. Listen to yourself. You keep saying heir. Child. Crown. Future. Never me. That landed. I saw it. Then his anger came back, colder now. I would burn this council to the ground before I let anyone separate you from what is mine. Mine. There it was again. The same word wearing protection like a disguise. I looked at him and felt the old wound rip open wider. You still do not hear it, I whispered. I am not asking whether you would protect the heir. I am asking whether you would ever choose me. He did not answer fast enough. And in romance, in war, and in grief, hesitation always sounds like the truth. The next morning, the palace woke like a house pretending it was not already on fire. No one mentioned the forest gate. No one mentioned the question Elias failed to answer. They did not have to. It was still between us, raw and breathing. I felt it when the war horn sounded from the eastern tower just after sunrise. One long blast. Then another. Not ceremony. Alarm. I was halfway through forcing down tea when the first messenger ran across the lower courtyard, mud on his boots, blood on his sleeve, panic in every step. By noon, the whispers had turned into orders. Alpha Dorian Voss had moved against the eastern territories and declared the throne unstable. I did not hear that from Elias. I heard it from 2 attendants outside my chamber, speaking too fast to realize I was already at the door. He says the kingdom cannot survive a king ruled by scandal. He says the heir in Nora Whitmore's womb proves the cord is fractured. I went cold all over. There it was. The child. My child. Not hidden inside a private fear anymore. Dragged into open political war. By late afternoon, the council chambers were full again. I was not invited, but this palace had taught me enough to know where silence gets dangerous. I stood just beyond the carved oak doors and heard Gideon's voice carry first. Calm. Controlled. Poison in formal language. Your Majesty, perception is everything now. The noble houses need immediate stability. Announce a political engagement. End the uncertainty before Dorian uses it to gather more support. I did not need anyone to explain the next part. I could feel it before Celeste's name was spoken aloud. She was noble. Acceptable. Soft enough for the court to praise. Sharp enough to survive wearing a crown. The perfect answer if the question was never me. Then Elias spoke, low and unreadable. This is a war council. Not a wedding negotiation. Relief flashed through me before I could stop it. It died just as fast, because Gideon answered without missing a beat. In this kingdom, they have become the same thing. I stepped back from the doors, one hand over my stomach, suddenly aware of how much bigger the walls felt when the whole kingdom started pressing against them. Whatever this had been between Elias and me before, it was no longer private enough to break in peace. War had reached the throne. And if the court decided a queen was the price of holding it, I already knew whose name they would put beside his. The forged document found me at sunset, folded inside a tray of untouched broth like poison wrapped in courtesy. No seal was broken. No hand was named. Just a royal draft written in cold, perfect language. Upon birth, the heir shall be secured under crown protection. The mother shall be relocated for reasons of political stability and lineage management. I read it once. Then again. My whole body went numb in the precise places pain had already practiced living. Relocated. Managed. Reduced to a temporary function with a pulse. Caleb found me with the paper crushed in my hand and knew immediately this was not rumor anymore. Nora, wait, he said, scanning the page too fast. This could be planted. I laughed once, the sound scraping my throat raw. Planted? I looked up at him. It sounds exactly like everything this palace has been preparing me for. He stepped closer. It also sounds too perfect. Too tailored to your fear. That should have helped. It did. Not. Because the most dangerous lies are the ones that fit the wound. I thought of Celeste offering to raise my child. Gideon talking about stability. Elias calling the baby heir before anything else. The pieces did not need to be true separately if together they already formed a cage. By full dark, I had made my choice. Again. Not because I believed running would save me forever. Because staying would break me first. Caleb did not argue this time. He only handed me a traveling cloak and said, "Storm is coming. If you go, go before the West Watch changes." We moved through the back passage as thunder rolled over Thorn Keep, low and heavy like the sky itself knew this was the wrong night to vanish. Rain hit the stone walkways just as we reached the service gate. Every torch hissed. Every shadow looked alive. I did not look back at the palace. I could not. If I saw one lit window and imagined Elias inside, still deciding who mattered more, I might lose the nerve to leave. So I kept moving, one hand over my stomach, boots slipping on wet earth, heart pounding with the ugly rhythm of grief and survival. The forest opened ahead, black and waiting. Caleb caught my arm once before letting go. "If this is forged, he will come after you." I pulled free, already shaking, already gone in the only way that mattered. "Then let him decide what he is chasing," I said. "The heir. Or me." And with storm rain blinding the path and the palace disappearing behind me, I stepped into the dark before anyone could stop me. By the time I reached the old ranger cabin beyond Black Hollow Ridge, my whole body felt borrowed. Rain had soaked through my cloak. Mud clung to my boots. Every step into the dark had cost more than the one before it. The cabin was little more than warped boards, a rusted stove, and one narrow cot under a cracked window, but it was off the main road and far enough from Thorn Keep to feel like a lie I could hide inside for one night. I pressed both hands over my stomach and forced myself to breathe through the tight ache gathering low and deep. "Not now," I whispered. "Please not now." The storm answered by hitting the roof harder. I had barely managed to light a lantern when the door opened again and Caleb came in, rain running off his shoulders, face tight with something worse than fear. "He knows," he said. I went still. "Who?" Caleb shut the door hard behind him. "Elias. He found the document after you disappeared." Maeve looked at it and called it what it was. Forged. The word should have brought relief. It did not. It only made everything hurt in a newer place. Caleb stepped closer. "He knows you ran because someone wanted you to find it." I stared at him, exhausted enough to hate the truth for arriving late. "And now?" Caleb's jaw flexed. "Maeve says the stress could bring the baby early if you keep pushing like this." My hand tightened over my stomach. The ache was still there. Faint. Wrong. Caleb's voice dropped. Elias left the court. Personally. Gideon tried to stop him. That landed. Harder than I wanted. He left the court. Caleb gave one sharp nod. He is hunting for you himself. The cabin suddenly felt too small for all the things that sentence carried. Not because it proved love. I was done being foolish enough to translate action into comfort. But because kings do not abandon war councils unless something has cut through the crown. I turned toward the window, toward the black shape of the trees, and hated that part of me was already listening for him. Caleb moved to the hearth, trying to coax flame from damp kindling. You need rest before you collapse. I almost answered. Then a cramp hit low and sharp enough to steal the words right out of me. I caught the edge of the table and breathed through it, fast, frightened, furious at my own body for choosing now to remind me I was no longer running alone. Caleb looked up instantly. Nora? I shook my head, but the line never made it out. Outside, somewhere beyond the storm, a wolf howl rolled through the ridge. Deep. Commanding. Close enough to raise every hair on my arms. Caleb went still. I did too. Because I knew that howl. And if Elias had found Black Hollow before the people who forged that document, then whatever happened next was going to be too late to outrun. By the time I reached the old ranger cabin beyond Black Hollow Ridge, my whole body felt borrowed. Rain had soaked through my cloak. Mud clung to my boots. Every step into the dark had cost more than the one before it. The cabin was little more than warped boards, a rusted stove, and one narrow cot under a cracked window, but it was off the main road and far enough from Thorn Keep to feel like a lie I could hide inside for one night. I pressed both hands over my stomach and forced myself to breathe through the tight ache gathering low and deep. Not now, I whispered. Please not now. The storm answered by hitting the roof harder. I had barely managed to light a lantern when the door opened again and Caleb came in, rain running off his shoulders, face tight with something worse than fear. He knows, he said. I went still. Who? Caleb shut the door hard behind him. Elias. He found the document after you disappeared. Maeve looked at it and called it what it was. Forged. The word should have brought relief. It did not. It only made everything hurt in a newer place. Caleb stepped closer. He knows you ran because someone wanted you to find it. I stared at him, exhausted enough to hate the truth for arriving late. And now? Caleb's jaw flexed. Maeve says the stress could bring the baby early if you keep pushing like this. My hand tightened over my stomach. The ache was still there. Faint. Wrong. Caleb's voice dropped. Elias left the court. Personally. Gideon tried to stop him. That landed. Harder than I wanted. He left the court. Caleb gave one sharp nod. He is hunting for you himself. The cabin suddenly felt too small for all the things that sentence carried. Not because it proved love. I was done being foolish enough to translate action into comfort. But because kings do not abandon war councils unless something has cut through the crown. I turned toward the window, toward the black shape of the trees, and hated that part of me was already listening for him. Caleb moved to the hearth, trying to coax flame from damp kindling. You need rest before you collapse. I almost answered. Then a cramp hit low and sharp enough to steal the words right out of me. I caught the edge of the table and breathed through it, fast, frightened, furious at my own body for choosing now to remind me I was no longer running alone. Caleb looked up instantly. Nora? I shook my head, but the line never made it out. Outside, somewhere beyond the storm, a wolf howl rolled through the ridge. Deep. Commanding. Close enough to raise every hair on my arms. Caleb went still. I did too. Because I knew that howl. And if Elias had found Black Hollow before the people who forged that document, then whatever happened next was going to be too late to outrun. The first thing I heard was Elias's voice cutting through the storm like the world still obeyed him. Stand down. Not shouted. Worse. Certain. Final. Then everything moved at once. Gideon's men went for the back exit. Caleb drove one of them off my path long enough for me to stumble toward the wall, one hand braced over my stomach, the other gripping the table so hard my knuckles burned white. Elias came through the doorway with rain on his coat and fury sharpened into something almost holy. Royal guards flooded in behind him, fast and silent, sealing the cabin instead of tearing it apart. That was the part that frightened Gideon most. Not chaos. Control. Gideon lifted both hands, smooth as ever. Your Majesty, this looks worse than it is. Elias did not even glance at him. His eyes found me first. Nora. Just my name. No title. No command. Caleb reached me at the same moment a cramp hit low and brutal enough to steal the breath from my lungs. I bent forward hard, and suddenly every sound in the room went distant except my own pulse. Elias crossed the space between us in 2 strides. Get her out of here. Gideon tried one last move. If the heir is born outside royal law, the succession fractures. Think before you. Elias turned then, and whatever Gideon saw on his face shut him up for the first time since I had met him. I am, Elias said coldly. That is why you are done. He did not wait for an answer. He lifted me into his arms like the storm, the guards, the conspiracy, and the whole kingdom could wait their turn. Outside, the rain hit us hard. Caleb and the royal guard held the perimeter while Elias carried me toward the old hunting cabin farther up the ridge. The only shelter close enough to reach before my legs gave out completely. By the time he kicked the door open, another wave of pain was already gathering. He set me down on the narrow cot, knelt in front of me, and for the first time since moonfall, there was no throne between us. No court. No strategy. Just the 2 of us and the child who had dragged every truth to the surface. My breath shook. So did his, though I doubted he knew it. I looked at him through stormlight and fear and the wreckage of everything we had been to each other. If I were not carrying your heir, I whispered, would you still have come for me? This time there was nowhere for him to hide. Not behind the crown. Not behind duty. Not behind the word mine. Just the answer. And whether it would save what was left of us, or finish breaking it. For one terrible second, Elias said nothing, and I thought the silence would kill whatever was left between us before the storm ever could. Then he stepped closer, knelt fully in front of me, and looked at me like there was finally nowhere else in the world he was allowed to look. Yes, he said. No title. No strategy. Just that one word. It hit harder than a speech would have. My breath shook. Elias kept going, voice low and stripped raw. If there were no heir, no court, no throne, I still would have come for you. I would have come because it is you. Pain pulled low through my body again, but I barely felt it over the force of that confession. He took my shaking hand and held it to his chest. I failed you at moonfall. I thought if I delayed, if I kept you outside the claim, I could buy time to root out everyone waiting for a visible bond. I was trying to protect you before I had enough proof to protect you properly. His jaw tightened. But I spoke like a king. I kept choosing caution, distance, and control. I made you feel disposable when you were the one thing I could never afford to lose. I wanted to hold on to my anger. It had kept me alive. But for the first time, his words did not sound like a crown managing damage. They sounded like a man finally telling the truth too late to make it easy. I do not know how to forgive you yet, I whispered. Elias bowed his head once, accepting the wound instead of arguing with it. Then do not forgive me tonight. Just survive it with me. Another wave of pain hit, stronger now, and before fear could fully take me, the cabin door opened and Elder Maeve rushed in with 2 attendants and armfuls of clean blankets. After that, time turned strange. Short and endless at once. Storm at the windows. Elias at my side. Maeve's steady voice cutting through the panic. And then one final, tearing effort later, a cry split the room clean open. Small. Furious. Alive. I broke on the sound of it. So did something in Elias. He stared at our child like the whole kingdom had just been reduced to one impossible heartbeat wrapped in a blanket. Maeve placed the baby in my arms first. Elias touched the child's head with hands that had commanded armies and somehow looked less steady than mine. When the guards and Caleb stepped into the doorway at Maeve's call, Elias rose, turned to them all, and made the one claim that mattered. Witness this, he said, voice rough but absolute. Nora Whitmore and this child are my family. I looked up at him, exhausted, overwhelmed, not healed but no longer invisible. And even as the storm eased outside, I knew the harder reckoning was still waiting back at the capital. We returned to Thorn Keep with our son wrapped against my chest and the entire palace pretending not to stare. That lasted less than an hour. By the time I stepped into the great hall, the court had already rearranged itself into battle lines dressed as ceremony. Gideon stood at the center with the same polished calm that had nearly destroyed me, and for one reckless second I understood why men like him were so dangerous. They never looked like the fire. They looked like the room before it noticed the smoke. Your Majesty, he said as Elias came to stand beside me, before this child is presented, the court deserves protection from fraud. My whole body went cold, but I did not flinch. Gideon turned toward the nobles. Nora Whitmore fled the palace during wartime, hid with conspirators, and now returns with a child conveniently claimed in private. The crown must consider whether this entire performance was staged to force succession through emotional manipulation. Gasps. Whispers. Not as many as before. That mattered. Before I could answer, Caleb stepped out from the lower aisle holding a leather case and a face I had only ever seen when he was done being afraid. Then let us protect the court from the real fraud. He laid documents across the council table one by one. Inventory records. Seal impressions. The forged royal draft. Gideon's private route authorizations. These orders were issued under Gideon Wren's clearance the night Nora fled, Caleb said. And this seal stamp matches the forged relocation order placed in her food tray. The hall broke open in noise. Gideon finally lost an inch of composure. Just enough. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Seize the records, he said. And remove Gideon's access to royal authority, effective immediately. Celeste stepped forward then, pale but steady, and did the one thing I had not expected from her. She looked at the court and said, I will not attach my name to a lie. I withdraw from all discussions of royal union. That silenced the room harder than any outburst could have. Gideon looked from her to Elias to me and seemed to understand, all at once, that the numbers had changed. Not in his favor. Elias turned to the full court, his hands settling at my back with a calm weight that did not feel like possession anymore. It felt like choice. The coup ends here, he said. Nora Whitmore was targeted because she carried my heir and because some among you feared the bloodline she represents. Those responsible will answer under crown law. I looked out across the hall at the same nobles who once watched me stand alone, and for the first time they did not look back at me like a scandal. They looked at me like I had survived them. When the guards led Gideon away, Elias turned to me quietly, privately, in the middle of all that public ruin. You do not have to stand here beside me. I looked down at the child in my arms, then back at the king who had finally learned the difference between keeping me and choosing me. No, I said. But this time, I will. Months later, Thorn Keep did not feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a place that had survived the truth and was still learning how to breathe around it. The new moonfall ceremony filled the great court with silver light, noble houses, and every memory I once wished I could outrun. The difference was simple. This time, I was not standing there to be judged. I stood with my son in my arms and my own spine intact. When Elias crossed the floor toward me, the room went still in that old, dangerous way, but I did not. I had already lived through his silence. I no longer feared it. He stopped in front of me, not on the throne dais, not above me, but level with me where everyone could see. Last time, he said, voice carrying through the hall, I let fear dress itself as duty. I will not do that to you again. The words hit deep because they were late and because they were true. Then he lowered himself to one knee. The entire court drew breath. Nora Whitmore, he said, looking only at me, not for the crown, not for the council, not for peace between houses, but for myself, I am asking you now. Stand beside me. Not as a vessel. Not as a symbol. As my queen, if and only if it is what you choose. For 1 second, the old ache rose. Moonfall Hall. Public silence. Public shame. The girl I was then would have said yes just to be chosen. I was not that girl anymore. I shifted our son against my chest and let the whole kingdom hear me clearly. I will never stand beside any man who mistakes my love for obedience. Elias did not flinch. Then I will spend the rest of my life proving I know the difference. I took one slow step closer. I will have a voice on the council. Yes. Our son will never be used as a weapon between houses. Never. And if this kingdom ever asks me to disappear for the sake of stability again, you will remember what happened when it tried. Something fierce and tender moved through his face. I will remember that the kingdom almost lost the only future worth building. That was the moment the last locked part of me gave way. Not because he knelt. Not because the court watched. Because he finally spoke to me like I was not something to protect around. I was someone to build with. I let out the breath I had been holding since the first moonfall and said the one word that belonged to the woman I had become, not the girl who had once waited for him to save her. Yes. The hall erupted after that, but the sound came from far away. Elias rose, and when he kissed my forehead instead of claiming the room with force, I knew the story had truly changed. Our son stirred between us, silver-eyed and furious at being the center of history before he could even walk. I smiled despite myself. The kingdom got its heir. Elias got his queen. But I got something better than either of those things. I got to be chosen without disappearing first.